Okay, it's 10 o'clock, so I'll make a start. Just to mention that this is being recorded, so once it's been edited, it'll go on our website in the Sharing Good Practice catalogue. But also, and I'll just share this very quickly, I've created a space in the Learning Hub. So I'll just show you this. So under training for trainers, let me go back. When you go to our resources there, so our catalogue, we've got trainee resources, and I'll just show you this. I've created a space for the trainees, which I emailed out all the first year trainees yesterday to tell them about the resources to support them following the webinar that I held last week on reflective practice for the OTAs. So there's the resources that are referred to in the video or in the webinar, and I've created a space to put that in there. Plus, we did an activity on analysing an example of reflection at different time points. So I've put that in there with an analysis on the next page for each of those, so it can help them in terms of shaping their own and developing their own reflections. I'm in the process of doing a similar thing for yourselves, which I should get done by the end of today, which is always a brave thing to say, I know, but if I say that, I will make sure I do it. And again, you've got a space there for it. You can't see that main resource at the moment because it's in development, but once it's live, that will have the video there for you. Plus, during the webinar for trainers last week, we analysed an example of reflection along an MDT meeting. So that will go, so we've got the example there, but the analysis will go in that main resource once it's gone live. And it's greyed out at the moment because it's in development, but following today's session, I'll do a similar thing for today's webinar as well. So any activities that we do, I'll break down into there. But once they're ready, I'll email all first year training officers with the link and the details, etc., including the link to the trainee one. Okay. Anyway, I'll go back to today's. So I'll make my formal introduction now. I can see we've got 40 people, which and going up, so that's fantastic. So my name's Sally Clee. I'm the Education Training Manager here at the school. And as part of supporting you and your trainees with the observational training activities, which includes the webinars that we did last week around reflective practice, we're going to look today as an overview, if you like, about the types of evidence and how you can support your trainees with developing that evidence for the observational training activities. So that tells you there. So different strategies that you can employ to support your trainees with developing that evidence, but also looking at what we mean by evidence for the OTAs. Now, obviously, the obvious thing is the reflective practice and reflections, but we could look at other sources of evidence as well as supportive evidence. Excuse me, I've got a tickle. So for any questions and polls today, we're obviously going to use Slido. So there's the QR code there and the details to access that. And we're going to start with a couple of polls just for me to get a flavour of who we've got with us today. So if I open the first poll up, our first one is, have you already assessed evidence for observational training activities? It's just to get an idea if, we might have people who already experienced it doing it. We might have some that haven't yet, so that's fine. it's good to have a mix actually, because those that have already done it can provide some advice and guidance as part of the polls and feedback, and then um, yeah, can answer questions too of other people. It's also make sure that everybody can get on Slido too. Brilliant. Okay, let's give people a chance. So if you're just joining us, the Slido details are up on the screen on the left-hand side on how to join. And it's just to judge how many of you, or proportion of people who have already done some and those that haven't. Oh dear. Okay. Sorry, Keris. There you go. Ignore that one then and use this one. I wonder what's going on there. Is this one working for you though, Keris? Okay. I've been doing too many webinars lately, so I've obviously got a bit. It was bound to happen with one of them. Okay, let's go to the next question, next poll though, and it's only a couple. So, how did you find the experience of actually assessing the evidence, or how do you feel about approaching these if you haven't already done it? Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good first comment. So it is difficult that are outside your own clinical specialty. Okay. Okay, yeah, that's felt they lack detail and depth, needs to get trainee to rethink. Okay. You're gaining confidence, yeah. Oh, I missed one there. Yeah, of course. It helps that my trainee is proactive and competent. Fantastic. Quite different to previous rotations. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Oh, I'll take that back. Yeah, okay. Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, I think it's really important. So I'm looking at this one here about if you've got a number of assessors that are going to be involved, is having some kind of standardization of what is what you're expecting in terms of the evidence as well. Okay. Okay, that's an interesting one. Yeah. So I think, sometimes with feedback, you can look at it in two parts. So you can feedback definitely on the learning, because that's really important, isn't it? Because that's what you're looking at in terms of to move the trainee forward and so on. But there's nothing wrong with actually, and as you would be good practice, if there's a couple of points that you think that they could have done to improve their reflection or their technique in reflecting, then that's fine, because that sort of can help them when they're moving forward. But obviously focusing on the learning is really important. Okay, yeah, so some of them are a bit vague in what they are asking. Good, excellent. Yeah, so amount of emphasis on procedural details versus reflection. Yeah, I think that's a really good point actually here. I think it is important to look for trainees, look for how trainees have understood what they've that they've what they've observed. I can't speak. and thought about how it affects their own practice. And I think that should be the emphasis, really, because if you think about, and we'll come to this after, but just in general terms, and since I've been putting together the resources following the reflective practice workshops last week, the key thing I feel is, that you want the trainees to get the most out of that experience as possible. And the purpose of those OTAs are to provide a context for what they're going to be doing themselves. So look at their, beyond just their immediate role. And so what they might focus on, let's say they were shadowing a consultant or shadowing another professional, the focus potentially might be something that they felt pertinent to them at that point. So, and I noticed someone put about procedural details versus reflection. They can still reflect on those procedural details. So the description might just be, I observed this, I shadowed the consultant during a clinic. They were, let's say, 5 patients. I'm just plucking a number out. 5 patients, and I looked. This is a summary of each of the patients that came in. Then it would be, their reflection would be what they learned about that process, and it could be in relation to how the consultant communicated with those patients, or was there a particular patient that that had an unusual diagnosis or whatever. I'm plucking things out of the air, but they can't necessarily reflect on absolutely everything in that situation. So I think it's important to recognise and set those objectives at the beginning, and hopefully with the information that I've put in the Learning Hub when it goes live will help you with that as well. But I'd love to hear some feedback about that anyway. And remember that early reflections might be limited. You might feel it's enough for them to achieve that training activity, but you can see where they might need to develop the depth of understanding, and that you can communicate that to them. So in the next one, I expect you to address these points that we identified in this one. And, because it's all part of their learning journey and developing their skills. Jennifer, I could see your OTAs are the, I'll come to it, observational training activities. So they're actually the training activities. The direct observations of practical skills, which is such a mouthful, DOPS, and the CBDs are the assessments that occur as part of the module that those OTAs sit in. Okay, does that make sense, Keris? Let me just, what I will do to help with that before we move on is go to the curriculum very quickly, and I'll just pick one. This is not me picking any in particular, but it's just to illustrate for you. So the rotations here. So you've got your modules in your rotations. Excuse me. You open that up and you've got the training activities, and these are called OTAs, so observational training activities, because they're basically they're ones that the trainee are observing rather than doing, if you like. But as part of that one module, so this one's introduction to audiology, they've got 10 OTAs to evidence, but at the end of that module, they're expected to complete 1 case-based discussion and 1 DOPS or OCE in order to finally pass that module. Does that make sense to you? Okay, so we're focusing on the evidence for the OTAs today. So, as I mentioned, I won't go through that again. On the Sharing Good Practice catalogue, we've got about reflections. Yeah, they used to be core competencies, that's it. No, don't worry about that. No, don't worry. It's fine. And partly the reason why, yeah, competencies can conjure up all sorts of things, and that's why it was changed, really, the language as well. So let's go. So those are really useful to keep in the back of my mind. Your comments there, actually, when we're going through this, because I think those are important things and common things that come up, actually. And trainees have similar sort of challenges in their own mind. They're not quite sure what depth they're supposed to go into. They're not quite sure, we're always asked, because so used to academic work and with some, that they think that they've got to, what's the word count? And with work-based assessments, it's not about word counts and that kind of thing, because they're not academic pieces of work. They're what occurs in the workplace rather. So this is taken straight from our school's work-based assessment standards, and these are found on the website. They're really important for you to look at, because they obviously explain each of the different types of training activities. So we're just looking at the observational type today, but in phase 2 and phase 3 of the trainees training, they will be doing DTAs, which are developmental training activities, and they'll be doing it's gone out my head, the other ones, which are their specialist ones, and it will come back to me in a minute. If you get a prize if you can remind me what they are. Entrustable, thank you, well done. There is no prize, you just get a warm fuzzy feeling for helping me out there. So in terms of the purpose of the OTAs, as you probably already know, it's for them to start getting trainees to develop an understanding of practice through observing others and observing other things, that would be related to what they do, such as MDT meetings stand out in my head, and clinics as well. But they also provide them with that wider awareness of the context in which they're going to work and how that might impact on their practice. So it gives them a focus around starting thinking about their own practice in relation to what they're observing in the workplace of other professionals, and what they might engage in as well. So MDTs, working with patients, the patient pathway, even if they're not patient facing in their specialty. So the purpose of the evidence might be that it contributes to the trainees' understanding of practice that they've already got, might expand on it, it might challenge it, it might actually reaffirm what they already knew or already felt about the practice. So it's starting to provide this more holistic view around what their practice should be, but also it provides them with the opportunity to start thinking about the context in which they're working and will be working, helps them embed into healthcare, into the healthcare environment and the patient focused environment, whether they're patient facing or not. But it also enables them to start considering what kind of healthcare scientist they strive to be, really, and not just in terms of the skills, but also in terms of them as a person and them as a professional. So the selection of the evidence that is used for the OTAs or whatever training activities, whether it's OTAs, DTAs, or the ETAs. I never used to have so many acronyms in my life in any of my previous roles. I get so many now. The selection of that evidence is going to be very personal to your trainee's specialism and their training journey. And that really has come through with some of your comments that you made on those early polls that we just looked at, because you are going to have differences between trainees in terms of what evidence they might emphasize when it comes to their reflections, for example. So you might have two trainees shadow a consultant, but what one trainee might pick up on might be a bit different to that of another trainee. So and that's not a bad thing at all, but actually there are ways that your trainees, if you've got more than one, together, can actually share those experiences and share the stories of their experiences to enhance their reflections and learning and understanding as well. So going back to Kerry's mentioned about the assessments at the end. So we've got the case-based discussions, direct observations of practical skills, etc. These training activities and the evidence that the trainee produces supports them and prepares them for undertaking those end of module assessments. So they all, they support them in actually developing their understanding, ready to engage with those assessments at the end. So we've already mentioned that it's important to look at the assessment standards. Obviously, the curriculum is also essential. And with whether it's the OTAs or any other training activity, it's important that the trainee knows what they're doing. They've discussed it with you to clarify anything. They acknowledge the learning outcomes just to help them contextualise that training activity. And of course, there's the consideration section as well. But just be aware that the considerations part of the curriculum is very generic, but it's just there to guide, and it's not an exhaustive list. There might be other things that you could guide your trainee with, and it's certainly not a checklist. So I'll just go back to this as an example. We've got, if I just pick one, attend an MDT meeting. It has the details there, but it has the considerations. But that doesn't mean that they've got to tick off each of these. It just might be that they reflect on a couple of these things. They might identify in their description that they observed some of these things, but what they actually reflect upon won't be necessarily all of it at all. So I know that some people have said to me before that they ask their trainee to then write about the things that they didn't see on the considerations. It's not to be used like that with the consideration section. It is there just as a guide to support you and support the trainee in contextualising what they're looking at. So let's go into the key elements of work-based practice. If you're familiar with the Learning Hub resources that we've got against the training standards, you might have seen this already if you've looked at the assessment one. So basically, there can be three key elements of work-based learning. So we've got learning is acquired in the midst of action and dedicated to the task in hand. We've got that knowledge creation and utilisation is a collective activity, so it involves other people. So learning doesn't happen in isolation. And learners need to take responsibility for their own learning, basically, and they need to feel free to question practice, to have an inquiring mind, I can't say it, in order to, sort of ask questions and clarify understanding and clarify learning. So if we look at that look at each of these in relation to OTAs specifically, obviously, whatever evidence they produce, it's got to meet the minimum requirements, and that comes from looking at the curriculum. It needs to be personal to their experience. So, they can't go just researching what the role of a consultant is in a particular area and just writing it up about that. We don't want that. We want them to be observing it and seeing it for themselves in practice. Excuse me. Needs to be specific to the experience that they're actually observing, like we say, and it can't be independently generated from practice, which is basically what I'm saying about not going away and researching the role and just putting that in as evidence. It needs to be that they're actually seeing it for real, they're experiencing it as an observer, and they're engaging with the people that they might be observing as well, whether after the event or during it, if it's appropriate. So a lengthy essay, as an example, is not going to be a suitable piece of evidence for their work-based practice. Okay. And that goes for that significant additional workload. It shouldn't be that they're going away and doing something separate from what's being asked of them in terms of to reflect on that activity. So element 2 is about that sort of it's a collective activity. So they need support to complete the OTAs, so from yourselves and assessors, regular conversations where appropriate with those people, but not just yourselves, but the people that are their sources of learning. So the people that they might be observing, other colleagues in the department are going to be a key source of learning as well, plus each other. So if there's more than one trainee, or there's a trainee that's now in the, let's say, phase 2 or phase 3 of their programme, then obviously they're going to be a good resource or source of learning for the first year trainee as well, because they can share experiences, have those professional conversations about reflections that they've undertaken and experiences that they've had. And all those experiences, if you like, of discussing and having conversations with other people can be good evidence for their OTAs as well, alongside their reflections. And they can use what they've discussed to enhance their reflections as well. So the feedback that they receive from yourselves and other people are essential for them in terms of developing it within the workplace also. And we'll come to different sources of evidence shortly for the OTAs, so I won't dwell on that at the moment. And then finally, the sort of trainees developing independence and questioning practice. Excuse me. The trainees' evidence for their OTAs should document their learning journey. So it shouldn't just be that they're uploading a polished piece of evidence and missing out the sort of process that they've been through to get there. So it's important that they gather evidence right from the beginning of that journey. So it could be their early reflections about something. If any of you attended the reflective practice workshop last week webinar, we talked about reflecting at different time points, because that's what they're expected to do. And I proposed 4 different time points that they could choose from to do that. And actually, the one key one is like before reflection, before the experience. And so if they reflect or reflect, if you like, before they have the experience, shows that they're planning for it and maybe identifying what their assumptions are before they go in. And then when they reflect on that experience afterwards, they can draw on those pre-reflections and say how they might have been challenged, etc. So it shows their sort of learning journey from before they have the experience to when to after they've had that experience. And that can start to support that, demonstrating the depth of that experience that they've had and observations, and also makes them more proactive and more responsive to that experience. And of course, it's demonstrating that learning through reflection. So it's important to remember that training activities must be successfully completed, obviously, but it doesn't mean they need to be successfully completed the first time a trainee submits the activity for assessment. So there's nothing wrong with getting some feedback and, developing that further, or having a conversation with you or somebody else that makes them think differently about it and actually add to the evidence that they've already submitted. And that could be a really extra reflection, short reflection that says, actually, I've had this challenge. My view on this has now been challenged by a conversation that I had with X, or I observed another clinic, and actually I feel very differently about this. So there's, their portfolio is about building evidence over time. So it's not something that they would do in one setting to say, this is it, I've done that in a week. It might be that they develop and revisit some of what they've already done to actually look at it from a different perspective. So we've got a planning for learning cycle here. So when we're thinking of work-based learning, work-based training, it's especially training activities. We'll do that in a minute, Fiona. I'll come up with, we'll look at that. That's one of the questions I'll be asking you shortly. The planning for learning cycle, if you think about a portfolio of evidence and the training activities, they're all about the trainee learning. So the assessment comes at the end of the modules, and then of course they have a final assessment in their final year. But the training activities are there to support them in that learning journey. So part of that is, we go through a cycle of learning when we look at work-based learning. So there's the planning stage, there's the doing, and then there's the reviewing. So plan is obviously planning for the OTA. The doing is implementing it. So the trainee undertakes the experiences linked to the OTA that they're focused on. And finally, there's a review. So they review it, they analyse the experiences and reflect upon it. Okay. So I'm going to ask you now, when supporting your trainees, sorry, I'm just opening it up. When supporting your trainees with developing evidence for OTAs, what is your role at each stage of the planning for learning cycle? Okay, let me open this up. So you can just put plan equals, do equals, review equals in your response. We can make multiple responses, but what do you see as your role? So let's see what we've got as our first one. So plan, help schedule and advise on who to speak to. Brilliant. Do, show and explain. Where's it gone? The activity, yeah. Have a conversation afterwards on details we didn't have a chance to discuss while doing the activity. Yeah, brilliant. Good start. Identify learning opportunities, contact trainee with appropriate contacts, yeah. Support if required during the activity, discuss feedback. Excellent. Helping to arrange placement visits, which is an absolute nightmare, by the way, I'm sure it is. Yeah, that's definitely part of the planning stage, and that's even before potentially the training even starts, isn't it? That conversation will take place and that will be implemented. Yeah, liaising with others, and yeah, that's a big part of what you're having to Facilitate there, definitely. Discuss with trainee, yeah. Facilitate the activity. Discuss reflections after submission, yeah. Plan, identify learning opportunities, yeah. Fantastic. Facilitate the activity and discuss before to the curriculum. Discussion review evidence, yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Yes, definitely. Yeah. Once, if we're talking to the OTAs, you probably have a lot more input with the planning stage with the training, especially in the early part of their rotations. You'd hope that they would start to take more and more responsibility and actually plan and bring you the plan to a certain extent, just for you to say, yeah, that's fine, or whatever. Year 3, you'd expect them to be leading a lot more. That's a really good point. Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. So having that conversation at the beginning about what their objectives are from their own personal standpoint is really important. That can help shape their reflections as well. Monthly one-to-one to monitor progress. I did brilliant. Yeah. Discuss and encourage them to reflect. And if any of you attended last week to the one on reflection, how you do that, we talk about written, we say reflective writing or whatever. It doesn't have to be written. So you have, it depends on how your workload depends on all sorts of factors. And this, I appreciate that some people don't have the opportunity to spend a huge amount of time with their trainee discussing. But if you can have a combination of them verbally reflecting with you about situations, and it's fine for you to actually just say, right, I'm satisfied you've met this training activity, and you just record that in one file saying the training I discussed X experience. They clearly identified that they recognised the role. I'm ad-libbing here, and that you can sign it off. You might ask for them to do a supplementary piece of evidence, such as an action plan or something like that. But other than that, there's different ways of presenting that. So in terms of plan, you've arranged opportunities, you discussed with the trainer what the OTA they're going to focus on. You plan for the experience by being clear what the purpose is, understand what the expectation of the training activity is. You provide direction for them and supporting them with the consideration section of the curriculum. You encourage them to engage and reflect before action. So that's something that you might want to look at. Particularly if you're trying to encourage your trainees to become more independent with that planning stage, reflect before action can be a really good tool for that. Plus, it provides them with a reflection at one point in time as well. And seeing as they've got to do reflection at 2 different points in time, they've already ticked one off by just planning for the activity as well. So have a look at what we did around reflect before action. It will go live later on today, the information on the Learning Hub around that. And I think you might find that really useful. Some of you, one of you did mention about sort of around supporting them in understanding what a successful completion of the OTA looks like. So that doesn't mean you have a model one, but you make it clear what you're expecting from them. And also reinforce that the evidence that they gather needs to show their learning journey. I've just put about having regular check-ins with them, whatever that might look like. Encourage them to ask questions, not just of you, but of the person that they might be observing, of the people that they might be observing, and encourage them to gather additional evidence. And that could just be including their notes that they took during the observation, or responses to questions that they asked of the subject that they were observing. So, or any points of interest. So, because even if it's just in note form, it is important because it shows their learning journey, and then their overall reflection will say, well, I've uploaded these notes because it shows that at that point in time I was feeling like this, but actually now I look back at it, I've changed my perspective. So it can really support them in shaping their learning and adding depth to their learning as well. And that is another form of reflection. So it's reflecting in action. So any notes that they make during it that actually, whether it's a mental note or a physical note, if they identify it as part of their evidence, that can actually enhance their learning from it too, looking back at it. Oh, I've gone forward then, sorry. And then finally, the review is obviously their reflection, but they might discuss it with somebody else, not just you. You might encourage them to do peer-to-peer sort of storytelling to share and unpick the experiences. Obviously encourage them to reflect at 2 different time points. They might, and you might suggest that they engage in a similar situation again to enhance their learning from it. Would they feel like they want to attend another clinic to actually, would they benefit from that? Would they benefit from observing another consultant or the same consultant but on a different day with a different set of patients? So there's lots of different ways that we can encourage different behaviours during that cycle. But obviously giving feedback's really important during that review as well. So you giving them feedback, but also them giving you feedback on how they find that experience as well overall. So we're going to look at now different types of sort of developing evidence to demonstrate achievement of these activities. Now, in the Learning Hub, I'll go into a lot more detail about this. There's a module on developing evidence or supporting trainees with developing evidence for training activities in general. And there are some examples in there of evidence selection for different experiences, including what format that might take. So, for example, I mentioned a health and safety incident, involvement with patients, attendance at a training event, attendance at a multidisciplinary team meeting, and also getting involved with public or patient engagement events. So you can have a look at that at your own leisure. But we're going to focus on OTAs here, which are slightly different to those other type of training activities. So any evidence needs to be authentic. So you need to be confident that the evidence that's being presented to you is genuinely your trainee's work. Okay. There are some safeguards built into one file because we've got Turnitin in there. So all evidence should go through Turnitin because that can detect plagiarism. But I would argue that the nature of the OTAs almost protects against plagiarism because it's about them reflecting on actual experiences. And that's quite hard to successfully artificially create. And you probably see that from the examples that I provide in the reflection webinars. You can tell they're artificially produced. They're good for generating a conversation around what is good and bad practice around, or good practice and areas for improvement around reflective writing, but they're easy to spot that they're not based on true experiences. And you can check understanding quite easily through a quick discussion or a couple of carefully phrased or crafted questions. Next one is validity. So how valid the evidence is, which I'm sure you're more than aware of what we mean by validity, being scientists. But basically, in terms of evidence for the OTAs, does the evidence presented satisfy the specific training activity? In terms of the evidence itself, it needs to give, the evidence produced needs to give an accurate picture of the trainees' learning or development having undertaken that activity. And then we've got reliability. So is there sufficient quantity, quality, and is it relevant? And I know this can be hard to judge, particularly for when we're talking about reflections. But you have got a professional discretion to hand. And it's about taking a step back yourself and thinking, well, let's say they're shadowing a consultant and the evidence that they produce, the reflection they've delivered to you, is it enough to say, yes, they have gained enough of an understanding of that role, let's say, of that consultant, they've picked up on the pertinent points that I would expect them to, and are you satisfied that it's sufficient to meet that training activity and that it's relevant to that training activity? An example also for reliability might be if you had a trainee for a training activity to support what they did, have a witness testimony to say that they undertook that activity. Are you confident that the witness testimony is from a person that is well qualified or in a position to be able to provide that to you and make that judgment? And finally is currency. So it needs to be up to date. So it can't be evidence that they completed before they started the programme from a previous qualification. It needs to be current. It needs to be that they're undertaking the activities on the programme, even if they've completed a similar one on a different programme previously, because it is for this programme that we're looking at. So basically, that's what we're looking at all together. So they're authentic, it's valid, reliable, and current. So types of evidence then. So for the OTAs, obviously these ones are the primary ones. So the observations they undertake of the experience that they're involved in and the reflections at 2 different time points for those as well. Okay. But these ones in blue might be supplementary or supporting evidence that they provide. I'm not saying they have to at all. I'm just saying that these might occur. So an action plan they might produce following their reflections. And actually, you would expect a certain amount of actions to have been identified anyway as part of their reflections. It might just be that it doesn't form a separate action plan. It might be included in those reflections. Or they might decide to produce an action plan as a consolidating piece of evidence that brings together all their reflections and identifies what actions they want to take in terms of their professional development following those experiences. They might include feedback from others to help inform and enrich their reflections. They might have evidence of professional discussions to help consolidate that learning, and that might include yourself. And going back to Fiona's question, do you need to submit a summary of the conversation, or can you just state that it took place? You can say it just took place. That's fine. From your perspective, you're the training officer. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, you just need to say that that it took place, that you had a conversation, and that you're happy. You're satisfied that they've demonstrated that knowledge and understanding. If it's with somebody else that you're not observing, then there's other ways to do that, and I'll come to that in a minute. There might be supplementary documents that they add, so they might add minutes of meetings if it was a meeting that they attended. It might be certificates of evidence, and I'll come to when that might be relevant for the OTAs. It might be policies or SOP SOPs that they observed being implemented, and they might include the SOP as additional evidence, but with their own annotations on it. And part of those annotations might form part of their reflection in action. The witness testimonies might not be used often for OTAs, but it depends on the context of that OTA. If they need supportive evidence to prove that they were at a particular conference or got involved in a particular activity, then you might include it there. And then questioning. So that might be twofold. So it could be questions you ask of the trainee rather asks of the person that they're observing or shadowing, and they might just make note down the responses to those questions will form part of their evidence. But questions that are asked of them either by you or somebody else, which actually inform their reflections, their responses to those actually form part of their reflections. And again, there might not be a record of it, like a written record. It might be enough for that we're saying that is fine for you as the training officer or assessor to say, we discussed this. I asked you some questions around what your experience, and I'm satisfied that you've demonstrated the knowledge needed or the understanding needed to actually achieve this training activity. That's fine. And that brings me to format. So the format of the evidence can be written. So you might have written records on reflections, observations, Q&A responses, and an action plan. Some trainees prefer things to be visual, so graphic organisers, basically mind maps is another way of describing it, or diagrams. So they might mind map some of their notes or some of their initial reflections, and that's fine, however they want to use those. They might record their reflections. So we had some trainees attending the workshops last week about reflection, and they said, I really don't like, I find it really difficult writing it down. I prefer talking about it. Well, record your reflections if you want to, either audio or visual, or, it's up to them if they prefer to. And it can be useful having a record, whether it's a written or an audio record, video record, because you can revisit those reflections and reevaluate them. But it's not 100% necessary at all. If they prefer and they are able to, and you have the time to do it, they could actually engage with a verbal reflection with yourself or another assessor, and you can just sign it off if you're happy that it is of sufficient detail and they've demonstrated that practice. That is fine. So you can use one file. I think I put it in my notes that there's a free text box, and they can write in that free text box that they undertook a reflection verbally with you, and then you just write in your feedback to affirm that it took place, and you might comment on the discussion there, just to say I particularly find it pertinent that you mentioned such and such, and you've now agreed that you're going to go away and maybe engage with another similar experience in order to enhance your learning from this one. So you can have it like that. That's perfectly acceptable for these OTAs. And that brings us to triangulation of evidence. So when we're talking about triangulation of evidence, if I can spit it out, is we're looking at approaching evidence in a triangulated way, basically, obviously. So it's basically utilising different sources of evidence rather than from one evidence type. Now, basically, this is the three different ways for work-based training would be conversations, work products, and observations. And you can argue that actually reflections that are done well can actually incorporate all these depending on how they're implemented. Now, this doesn't mean you have 3 pieces of evidence for a training activity. For some specialty training activities, let's say, if you're looking beyond the OTAs, they might have way more than 3 different pieces of evidence to support that training activity. But for the OTAs, they might just have 1 or 2 pieces, but they actually incorporate these different sources of evidence, which I'll come to now. Okay, let me just see. So the evidence, I'll skip forward, we don't need that again. So I'm going to ask you first to have a think about what types of evidence could be gathered for the OTAs against each of these parts. So if we start with the conversation type first, what types of evidence might come under conversations for the OTAs? We've kind of answered some of this already. Yeah, so you might record the conversation on an MS Teams meeting. Yeah, definitely. Pre-reflections with training officer. Perfect. Written records of discussions. Yeah. So the trainee might have gone off and had a discussion, not with yourself, but with somebody else that might be linked to the activity they're about to engage in. Conversations they've had with others. Brilliant. Yeah. Conversation might be in the form of a witness testimony. Yeah. Brilliant. Reflection by the trainee. Yeah. Conversations with colleagues, training reviews. Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. Meeting minutes. So potentially, yes. Meeting minutes could be for 2 things. So it could be partly conversations if it shows their participation, definitely. But it can also be partly a work product, especially if they've annotated it. So it's not something they produce themselves, but the annotations are if it shows some annotations on there. Email follow-up of an event, so conversation, yeah, definitely. So there's a number of things there, yeah. Okay, if we go to the next one, which is the work products then. What might come under work product? Annotated test results, brilliant. Yeah, clinical reports, witness testimonies, reports of quality control tests, yeah, that they were involved in. Yeah, reviewed documents with annotations, track changes, results of tests. Yeah, yeah, anonymized patient results annotated with trainees interpretation. Brilliant. Yeah. Fab. Yeah, quality assurance sheets. I presume that is. Tell me if I'm wrong. I don't mind being told I'm wrong. Yeah. So if they go and observe a clinic, some of what they might upload, they can't upload anything that identifies a patient, obviously, but they can upload sort of test results as long as they've been anonymized. They might say, you know, this patient, these are the patients that really stood out in the clinic, and how the consultant dealt with these patients, and they can then demonstrate how they've interpreted the understanding of the science, as well as the how the consultant approach, the sort of professional skills that they employed. Supervisor reports, okay. CPD certificate, yeah, particularly if it's followed up with a conversation type. And I would argue that reflections are a conversation. They're a conversation with yourself, So if they've got a CPD certificate and then reflect on how it's going to impact on their practice, that's triangulation in action, definitely. Yeah, anonymized, summary of patient's plan, definitely. So all these things are perfect examples of supplementary evidence that they might add in because they enhance or support what they're saying in their reflections as well. And finally, we've got the observations type, which kind of self-explanatory. Mainly in reflection. So you'll find it, depending on how they've structured their reflection, the description of what happened will be their observation. If they reflected in action, they might include their observation notes of some kind. Yeah, so bullet point notes of what they've witnessed and in action thoughts, definitely. Thank you. You've summarised that much better than I did then. Description of what they saw. Yeah. What also might form part, I was just about to say that, so I'm glad someone put it up. Witness testimonies or witness statements. Yeah, they're observations by other people of that trainee to say that they undertook the activity. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, their reflection itself. So the reflection itself, if written, if recorded, or it might not be recorded, if discussed properly, verbalized properly in conversation, will potentially be triangulated. So, as an example, their observations will be included in that reflection, whether verbally or physically in written form. The conversation they have with themselves and with you or whoever, is part of that reflection. And the work products element might be satisfied by if they've got some of their notes from their from their experience, observations, they might upload as supplementary evidence of them actually taking part in it. But also the work product might be an action plan that they produced following their reflection as well. That's brilliant, thank you. So basically, I don't need to talk through all this at all, but there's a summary, and you've come up with more than I did because I just very vaguely put relevant supporting documents there. You came up with some actual specifics around that, which is brilliant, like annotated SOPs, annotated policies and procedures. It could be annotated meetings, minutes of meetings. If when they attend the MDT meeting to observe it, they might have documents related to that meeting that they've annotated and anonymised as well, of course. And they might produce an action plan. So all sorts of different ways that they can do that. But the specialties all have a training activity very similar to this one, and it on the surface seems a bit of an anomaly when we consider what the other OTAs are like. So this one's basically exploring innovation or improvement relevant to the department and reflect on the impact this will have on practice. So you might have already done this with your trainee, and it'd be interesting to hear how you approached it, or if you haven't, how could you, considering, or how could your trainee rather approach it in relation to the three different elements of triangulating that evidence? So let's open that up. I've opened it up already. So we're going to look at an innovation or improvement relevant to the department. Well, we know we've got a reflection there, but what else could they do? What other evidence could they provide? Performing an audit, yeah, definitely. So that could be a work product straight away. It's sort of like an observation as well. So the actual audit itself is a work product, but it's developed. Yeah, they highlight observations in there. Oh, brilliant! Yeah, okay. I got very excited then. Where has it gone? So we normally tell them about a new innovation, ask them to research it, and give a presentation at a team meeting. Brilliant, yeah. So as evidence, they upload the slides, that's the work product, and the assessor confirms the presentation was done. That's an observation. And then the conversations will be their reflection after the event. So that's perfect. Yeah, so they might upload any sort of documentation, an audit. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I think yeah, someone mentioned about journal clubs at one of our sharing good practice events. So that's fantastic. Yeah, that search that one out because it will be in our catalogue as well. I'll identify which one that is, and I'll put it in my follow-up email as well. Implementation of a new SOP, and they can put that SOP in with annotations on it, etc. Yeah, and reflect on it. Brilliant. Yeah, so loads of ideas here, each to the whole department. That's brilliant. Oh, the reflection was either in the presentation or added as additional evidence. Fantastic. Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, I love it. I think this is so they would do a written reflection, observe practice before and after. Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, that's another way. Okay, we've got some fantastic suggestions there. And so if you're somebody who hasn't done this with their training yet, you've got some really good ideas there already. It's a way of sharing good practice, just doing this poll, gathering your ideas about that. Yeah, encourage them to ask the other trainees to ask them questions after the talk. That's brilliant because that not only enhances the trainee who's delivering, enhances their learning, but it also enhances the learning of those trainees that are participating as the audience. That's brilliant. Brilliant. 2-page max. And actually, that focuses them to be more concise too, actually, to say, look, we're not looking for this huge essay. We want a clear uh, uh, clear steer on what you think the impact will be, definitely. Yeah. Wow, so 7 trainees. Yeah, so that's a brilliant way of doing it. Great. Okay. So thank you for that. I think when I did this with the trainees on Tuesday, one trainee mentioned that they'd been to a conference, uh, where consultant was talking about a particular innovation. So obviously they submitted evidence that they attended this conference, and then they did a presentation to the team about it. So there was multifaceted way of doing it. Also, some mentioned about observing practice that would benefit from that innovation. So their short observation about that, then observing it being implemented if that is able to do that. So yeah, and you've mentioned those things as well, which is fantastic. So thank you. Basically, the important thing is, and this is just me emphasizing this, so whether it's the reflection, which we talked about last week, the emphasis needs to be on the learning. So what the learning that they've taken from it, and what actions they're going to take or plan to take or have taken in light of that experience in order to develop their own practice and develop their own learning around it. That whatever evidence they upload, it needs to demonstrate that learning. Okay. So and it's demonstrated through the application of what has been observed. So that could be, it doesn't matter if it's about when they've attended an MDT meeting, or looking at the role of the consultant, or researched or read something around a piece of legislation or a new innovation. The learning doesn't come from a long description about it. It comes from them reflecting on it. And actually, some of you mentioning about them presenting it to others, there was a lot of research done into different methods of teaching and learning, and they found that the most learning comes from having to teach somebody else about it, because you need to be confident in that subject in order to successfully deliver that information to somebody else. So asking the trainee to present it to the team, so consolidate it, summarise it in a way that they have to present it to others, is really high up there in terms of developing their learning and understanding, because they're having to internalise it, they're having to assimilate that learning before they can actually teach others. So that's a really good example. I've got another one here, and actually you might find that it's similar, but this is another one that crops up across the board in one way or another. And it's basically, I've summarised it as: reflect on how a piece of legislation or a guideline guides the delivery of services in your specialism. So again, we'll do this as our next one, because I think it's useful for other people too, if they haven't come across this one yet. How would you, how about your trainee approach, or have they approached this OTA? So basically, what evidence would you expect or accept off them for this? So I'll open that one up. Audit, guidelines review, presentation, guidelines review, meeting minutes, yeah. Annotation, professional body guidelines, yeah. Audit against the standard, yeah. Written summary, yeah. But you might have a written summary, and then they might draw on some observations in practice that they've seen this being guided by that. Yeah. Discuss guideline, use it as a template for an audit. Oh, we're going quick. Summarise a meeting where the guideline has been discussed. Yes. You might find this gets embedded as well in some of their other reflections. So they might not. So remember that, they might have a reflection that actually meets more than one training or contributes to more than one OTA. So let's say they, in their observations or shadowing of a consultant, they might actually see them implementing a specific guideline. So they can cross-reference that piece of evidence to both training activities as well. Influenced by national guidelines such as NICE, yeah, definitely. Yeah, exactly, yeah. So you've got it. Ask them to read the guidance, then link to the observer clinical scientist in training activity, yeah. Yes, so if they haven't referred to it in their original reflection, they can reflect on it directly, definitely, yeah. And actually, I'll tell you, that is a really good example of going back to what we're talking about, reflecting at two different time points, because their original reflection of a clinical scientist would be their one reflection. Then they're revisiting it and reassessing what they saw in relation to the guidance is their second point in time for that one, because they're revisiting and reevaluating what they saw. So there's you can be really savvy, if you like, with it in terms of um, they're not having to do something, they're looking at them linked and interlinked with each other. And that's actually really good practice to do. So how it influences practice. And again, how they do this, again, can be verbal with you. It can be recorded as a Teams meeting. It can be all sorts of different ways in what format they actually deliver it as well. So I've got a few suggestions, which are a little bit non-specific because obviously you're coming from a very, your specialist standpoint. But a product might be an annotated summary of the legislation or guideline. The SOPs, they might have annotated that and linked to those guidelines and legislation and identified where, what SOP it is. They might have undertaken multiple observations of practice and have seen this implemented rather. Because they, if they think they're doing lots of observations at different times for different training activities, when they look back at those multiple observations, they might be able to pick out at different time points they've seen that. And then the conversations type is record of any discussions, obviously their actual reflections, however they're recorded or however they're undertaken. So if they're undertaken as a conversation with you, then obviously that is the conversations type. But if they've got any records related to where they've discussed these with colleagues informally and formally, they might say, so what are you doing there when you do this? How's this linking with this? So asking those questions and being dynamic, it happening dynamically like that. They might get a witness testimony for that from that colleague to say, yeah, we discussed how this links in with the standard operating procedure linked to such and such. Okay, so there's different ways of doing it. Note on reflections. Obviously, there's the recordings from last week, the trainees and the trainers one. If you didn't attend, I really strongly recommend that you do access it. The actual recording is shorter than the actual webinar just because we cut out all the Slido stuff because it's really it's difficult to look back on as someone who wasn't there. But what was discussed in those Slido polls has been put as a narrative in consolidated and summarised in the Learning Hub. Will be once I make it live. But please look at those. Encourage your trainee, if they haven't already, to access that the recording and the resources in the Learning Hub to help them. We looked at the 4-dimensional approach to reflection. I'm not going to go through it now, but it's those are the 4 different approaches that I've alluded to today as well during our conversation. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about, have a look at it on the Learning Hub and watch the webinar back. They don't have to do all 4, obviously, because they only have to do it at 2 points in time. But many trainees were really encouraged actually and find it useful to consider doing something about before and after the event. Obviously, after is what we normally associate with reflection, but also using notes that they might have made during an experience as well. We talked about very briefly that there are different models that they can adopt or use. It's not prescriptive at all. From our perspective, it doesn't matter. It's about personal preference. But if they do anything at all, if they are switched off by models, if they just think about these components of reflection, then that will help them in terms of shaping those reflections. Before I move on to Q&A, I'll just show you in the catalogue. It might have logged me out. No, that's a surprise. I produced this guide to reflection. Oh yeah, I has. Let me just do that. I produced this guide to reflection, and basically, and the trainees have had this shared with them, and I shared it with the trainers last week. And wouldn't you know it, it suddenly goes slow when I try to do it. Basically, it's got the 4 dimensions of reflection, and for each one, it has some questions that can aid that type of reflection. So, questions to aid reflect before action. And if the trainees respond to these questions, each of them, do a response, whether verbally or written, in whatever way, then they've basically done their 1 point, 1 time point reflection. So it's done. Same with reflected action, if they do it. So there's some questions there and a few, bit of guidance for each of those questions. Same with reflect on action and reflect beyond. Okay, so that resource is there. It's already available for you to access to help you. Okay. Brilliant. That's great. So it just leaves me to say we've got lots of other sources of support. The NHS Learning Hub. We've got some modules of learning for you, for trainers rather. If you're new to the training role, there's introductions to all those things. They're not compulsory at all. They're just there to support you if you need them. We're getting a mammoth number of sharing good practice webinars and recordings now in our catalogue. So please explore it on the website. But there's one by Danielle Cartwright, which some of you might have attended, on a novel approach to reflection and assessments for first year rotations. Have a look at that. You might find it really useful. There's also the one on standardising expectations and evidence requirements for STP training activities. That one is by Jessica Taylor. That might be the one that includes the journal clubs. I'm not 100% sure now. And we have a huge number on reflective practice from HSST trainees. They're really inspirational. Some of them touch on how to go about it, but if your trainee or the people in your department even, because reflection isn't just about achieving assessment or achieving a training program. If you want to be inspired about the impact of reflective practice, look those HSST trainees presentations up. They're brilliant. They're absolutely fantastic, and they make me so happy. So, and that just leaves me to say thank you. Thank you so much for attending today. Thank you for your engagement and your contributions as well. And I hope it's been of some use to you today.